Hey new Tekken players, hope everyone is doing well and having fun with this amazing but very challenging game. Now today I want to address a question that I've seen a lot of on forums, Reddit and stream chats, which boils down to either who should I main or how do I pick a main? Before I unpack this question, let me just give you the standard and universal answer, which is main whoever you like the look of or whoever you think looks cool. The reason being that if you want to get into this game, you will be literally spending hundreds if not thousands of hours playing it, so you might as well get to play a character you're going to get along with. However, if you're still unsure, or you specifically want to play a character who will help you learn the game, I'll be explaining why I think, in my humble opinion, the best character for new players for learning Tekken is good old fashioned Mr. Paul Phoenix. Just before I go any further, although I intend to explain why I think Paul is a good character for new players, this will not be a specific video about how to play him in detail. There are, however, plenty of Paul guides out there from the likes of Peter Mayo.
There's quite a few of them. Damage. This.
The main man.
1+2, +3 on block.
Frame Whisperer.
It's extremely good.
And my personal favourite, Joey Fury.
Is quarter circle forward 2, the mighty Death Fist or Phoenix Smasher. This move.
So feel free to check them out if you want to learn the details of the character, if you decide that you want to main him after watching this video. As I said at the start, I want to try and explain why I think Paul is a good character for new players who really want to learn Tekken. So let me just explain roughly what I mean when I use the phrase learning Tekken. When playing Tekken, there are two aspects to learning the game. First, there is learning your character. For example, what are the best moves? What are their best strings? How do I combo? What are their best setups? Now for a lot of casual players, this is perhaps as far as they want to go with learning the game, and there is absolutely nothing wrong with that. Not everyone wants to dedicate time into learning or progressing on what can be an incredibly complicated game. And to be clear, there are some characters in this game that are so strong that once you have mastered that character, they will take you quite far up the ranks. The obvious examples are characters like Hoang, the Williams sisters, Eddie and Lucky Chloe, to name just a few. All of these characters have built-in amazing tools such as plus and block strings that are easy to execute, launching plus and block power crushes, big damage 50/50s and built-in evasive tools. As a combination, they can create amazing flowcharts that will just steamroll over new players. Just to make it plain that I'm not shitting on this attitude or playstyle, this is exactly how I started playing Tekken 7 when I bought the game back in Season 3. I picked up King because I used to main him in Tekken 3 and I could still to this day remember most of the chain grab commands, so I would just go into ranked and throw people into oblivion or spam the alley kick string until eventually I won the match. Now I was having a lot of fun, however, even though it took me a long while, I only really got as far as the edge of green ranks and I just could not get any further. Now what I'm trying to say is if you're only focusing on learning a Tekken character, then eventually, whoever you pick, you'll hit a wall where your character can only take you so far, because other players know the game better than you do, and they will beat you by not falling for your setups and knowing how to counter your own character's moves. At this point, if you want to progress any further, then you will need to learn how to play Tekken as a whole, and not just your own character. This is roughly what we mean when we talk about Tekken fundamentals, which are, in short, universal skills such as punishment, movement, timing, defense, spacing and matchup knowledge within the game. These apply to the game as a whole and not just how your own character works. For me, when I wanted to try to learn Tekken, I decided to try to learn Kaz based on what I'd read, as I was told that Kaz is Tekken. No gimmicks, no easy mode, no training wheels. You have to learn the game with Kaz and you either sink or swim by it. Now I will explain later why I think I got this wrong, and in hindsight Paul would have been a better option. Now the Tekken GOAT, aka Knee, famously once said, although I am paraphrasing, to beat someone at Tekken you must know your opponent's character better than they do. Now although this sounds pretty daunting, in these low ranks that's actually quite simple. It really comes down to how well your opponent knows the character. So for example, does my opponent know that the move they're throwing out is actually launch punishable? Do they know that I can duck the second hit of this string and launch them? Does my opponent know when they are plus or minus on their frames? Does my opponent like to swing big moves while I create space? Are they predictable with their setups and timing? If they're not interested in learning Tekken, chances are they don't really know any of this, and therefore in effect you have a better understanding of their character better than they do because you know the game as a whole, and therefore you'll be able to beat them. If at this point you're already saying to yourself, what the hell is this guy going on about punishment, highs and launchers, then I strongly suggest watching my How to Beat Low Rank Spam video, which I'll put a link to here. This explains the basic mechanics of Tekken, including the terminology that we'll be referring to in this video. For those of you who are still here, I hope I've made it clear the difference between learning to play your character and learning to play Tekken as a whole, including understanding Tekken fundamentals. So now, let me go into detail as to why I think Paul is one of the best characters for new players who want to understand Tekken as a whole. Right, so when learning Tekken fundamentals, I mentioned that one of the key skills to learn is punishment. In case you're unfamiliar with what we mean when we talk about punishment, this is when you're able to land a guaranteed move on your opponent either after blocking an unsafe move that they've attempted or because their move has whiffed, which is when it fails to hit you and just whiffs in the air. With Paul, his standing punishment options are his 1-2 jab string, his back 1-2 for -12 or small whiffs, and back 3 or down forward 2 for launch punishable moves or big whiffs. But while standing, he has while standing 4, then at 13 frames he has while standing 3-2, and with while standing 2 for blocking big sweeps. All of these punishment tools are really good in general, but they have 3 really key factors that make them excellent for new players who want to learn the game. Number 1, they are all safe on block. So, if they are blocked, your opponent can't punish you in return. Or to put simply, when you're learning, you may not know your opponent's frames, so you might attempt to punish a move that you've blocked and turns out you got it wrong. So is it -10, is it -12 or is it -15? So knowing you have a set of options that are all safe is really helpful when learning. The counter example of this is the classic Mishima 1-1-2 flash punch. Now this is an amazing punish for 10 frame moves, however if it is blocked because you were either too slow or you didn't realise that your opponent's attack was actually safe, you can actually get launched for throwing this out if you're not careful. This is also true for the Mishima while standing 4-4. Here's a couple more examples of punishes that if you mess up, you are actually going to get punished yourself for throwing out. Now, where, at least I think, this has the biggest win for Paul is his down 4-2, and to an extent his back 3, which you can use to launch your opponents if they throw out a move that's either -14 or -15 on block. Both of these options are themselves actually safe, which means you have absolutely nothing to lose with throwing them out, just to see whether the move you blocked was indeed launch punishable. Now again, for reference and to counter example, most other characters, if you want to punish something at -15, you have to use a hop kick, but all hop kicks in this game are unsafe, and to be honest, most other players know this. So if you mess up your hop kick punish, you're going to pay for it. So the fact you have an alternative, safe on block move to test or learn which moves in this game are themselves launch punishable is incredibly helpful with learning the game. Now I can already hear the furious typing of veteran players saying, hey, back 1-2's not safe, it's a high string. And this is true, but now you're entering the world of higher level play, where it takes knowledge and skill to be able to duck and punish a failed back 1-2. But in these lower ranks, the fact it's safe on block is the key here. So, moving on to the second really helpful thing about Paul's punishment options is that they generally have decent range. His back 1-2 is pretty reliable at punishing moves with a lot of pushback, which again makes it much more viable to throw out to try and punish your opponent's blocked attacks. Again, here's a few examples where this range is really helpful. Okay, so I think we've established that Paul's punishment game is really good in general, but I can hear you already saying, Beige, if you want to use a main that has amazing punishment tools to help you learn Tekken, why not use Kaz, who has, on paper, a plus on block, -13 launcher, and some of the best punishers in the game? Well, this leads neatly to point 3 about Paul's punishment options, which is the ease of execution. I have the dummy here set to throw out a -15 move and then block straight afterwards, so we'll only be able to launch the dummy if we've actually punished it properly. Now I'm not going to edit this is live and an attempt for me to punish, first of all with Kaz. And now with Paul. So I think that's pretty self-explanatory, but to make it crystal clear, if your aim is to learn the game and punishment in general, having a move that requires far less execution means you can rely on it more often, and therefore you'll learn about block punishing much quicker. As I mentioned earlier in the video, although I love playing Kaz and deliberately chose to play him to learn Tekken, I wish I had picked Paul, because the ease of execution and some of the other creature comforts I'm going to outline next. Having covered block punishment, let's look at other aspects of Tekken fundamentals such as movement and defense, which go together to build your fundamentals. Now, despite popular opinion, Paul's game plan is actually all about defense and keep out rather than being aggressive. This is made obvious by the fact he has some of the best keep out moves in the game. For one, down 4-2, but there are others. The general game plan for Paul is to try to turtle while playing keep out, then launch your opponent from either a whiff or a counter hit, get them to the wall, and then keep your wall pressure until their life bar is deleted. When it comes to spacing and whiff punishment, Paul has some great options. For whiff punishment, he has back 1-2, which has great range and speed as we've already mentioned, and more importantly, to quote Jury Fury, you have to have Death Fist always primed and ready for big whiffs. So for this game plan to work, you have to play defensively and capitalise on your opponent's mistakes, especially if they're overly aggressive. Again, this will help teach you how to play defensively by trying to work on and trying to bait out a whiff or waiting for your opponent to throw out a big risky move. All of this will help you build on those Tekken fundamentals that we keep talking about by learning to be patient and not just playing hyper aggressive. So finally, let's go over a few other reasons why I think Paul is great for new players who want to learn Tekken, which include some of his key strengths and weaknesses. Let's begin with combo versatility. Paul has more or less a universal combo filler for any of his launches or counter hits, whereby you just adjust the pickup depending on what the launch is, and the ender depending on where the wall is. This is also true for his wall combo, which is again pretty much universal. Now the reason why this is brilliant is because if combo execution and knowledge is relatively simple, it gives you more time to concentrate on the more fundamental parts of the game when you're learning. Just to be clear, Paul's max damage combos require some ridiculously high levels of execution with being able to do multiple quarter circles really quickly. So if you do want a challenge later on, then it's definitely there with Paul. Next, let's talk about his panic and evasive moves, which, as I mentioned before, is definitely something Kaz doesn't have, but I'll be honest, it would be great if he did. Paul has some great tools for either option selecting on certain moves and strings. Here's a couple of examples to show you what I mean. Some of these are risky, but they are fantastic panic buttons to get you out of certain situations. Now admittedly, these moves will not help you build on your Tekken fundamentals because it is in effect sort of a get out of jail free card, but they are still very valuable against certain characters and probably the cheapest part of Paul's design outside of his huge damage in my opinion. Okay, so far I've talked a lot about Paul's strengths and one of the multiple reasons why I think he's a great character in general, but particularly great for new players. So let's talk about some of his weaknesses. Number one, he doesn't really have any strings that you can cheese people to death with. He has a couple, but there's basically no variety in them to keep your opponent on their toes, unlike other characters such as Hwang, Steve or Jin for example. However, I would suggest that his lack of cheese strings will actually force you to work on your defense and your fundamentals that we've already mentioned. If you want to just rank up quickly without learning the game, pick any of those other characters that I've mentioned that have lots and lots of string cheese and just spam it all day long. The last only real weakness that Paul has in his arsenal is he doesn't have any 13 frame mids like the generic downforward one. So if you want to get into the world of poking with Tekken Giggity, you may want to choose a different character to build on this fundamental skill. Well, before I sign off, I'll just make a couple of honourable mentions that often get suggested for people who want to choose a main in order to learn how to play Tekken. One would be Kazuya, but I've already mentioned I think his execution is pretty damn high, so you may want to come back to him after you've got to grips with the basics. Another couple of names that often get suggested are Shaheen and Kazumi. Both of these characters have a complete Tekken kit list with great pokes, strings, mids and lows. The only reason I personally wouldn't put them in number one pick is because we don't know for sure, either due to the story lore or from the popularity of the characters, we don't know for sure they'll be back for Tekken 8, which is something you may want to consider if you're thinking long term. Paul, however, has been a staple since Tekken 1 and will always make every Tekken game, so if you're thinking long term, you've got absolutely nothing to worry about. Well, thanks everyone for listening to my TED Talk and my case for Paul being a great newbie main. This question can never truly be answered definitively, so feel free to let me know your thoughts in the comments below, and please like and subscribe if you think I've deserved it, and I'll see you all in the next one.
Final round. Fight.